You make it really hard to edit when you guys are doing this. One of the films is like, I'm going to do this into response. Okay, in response to you looking at your library, I'm going to catch my face.
And then I'm
How
going
am I supposed to narrate that without like making you
children facts.
Dan starts us off with a tapped, watery grave and passes. Nathan plays a thriving island and names green. I play a myriad landscape and pass. Joe plays a sheltered thicket and passes. Dan plays a sunpetal grove and passes. Nathan plays a forest and casts a swiftfoot boots and passes. I play a plains, a soul ring, and a sky diamond, and I pass. Joe plays a forest and casts nature's law to fetch up a cinder glade. He passes the turn. Dan plays a command tower and an offenser the foremost. Nathan plays a sky shroud expanse. He casts Curse of Verbosity on me and passes. I cast a stoic farmer and get a plains from my library onto the battlefield. I then play a plains for turn. I cast a golden egg, drawing me a card, and I pass the turn.
Face Whisperer? Yeah. I'll pass turn.
Just gonna whisper that. You suck.
Casts Eric Smithies. He moves to combat and attacks me with an offenser. He and Nathan draw a card from the Curse of Verbosity. I take 3 damage and Dan passes the turn. Nathan plays a Path of Ancestry. He casts Behemoth Sledge and passes. I move straight to combat and attack Dan for 3. In my second main phase, I cast Soul Herder and then an Azorius Signet. I move to my end step and blink the farmer with the Soul Herder, which gets me a plains into my hand and put a counter on Soul Herder. Joe starts his turn. He casts Vizier of the Menagerie and draws a card from the Beast Whisperer. He passes the turn. Dan plays Cascading Cataracts and filters his mana through it to cast the Prismatic Bridge. He then suspends Search for Tomorrow. He moves to combat and attacks Nathan with an offenser. He passes the turn. Nathan plays a Canopy Vista. He casts his commander and passes the turn. In his end step, I crack my Myriad Landscape to fetch 2 islands. I cast Fibblethip and draw a card. I move to combat and attack Dan with the farmer for 3. I then cast Yorion and exile the farmer, Fibblethip, Golden Egg, Soul Ring, Azorius Signet, and the Sky Diamond. I then pass the turn. At the beginning of my end step, I order my triggers so that Soul Herder is at the bottom of the stack, targeting Yorion. Yorion's trigger returns my other permanents, and their ETBs go on the stack. I fetch a plains into my hand and draw 2 cards. The Soul Herder's ability then resolves, and flickers Yorion, who, when entering, exiles the farmer, Egg, Fibblethip, and questionably the Soul Herder. Joe then starts his turn. He casts Courser of Krufix and draws a card. He reveals Garrick's Horde on top. He plays a Grove of the Burnwillows and gains 1 life from the Courser. He moves to combat and attacks Dan for 3. He passes the turn. At the beginning of his end step, my permanents return, putting a plains into the battlefield and drawing me 2 cards. Dan starts his turn. He removes a suspend counter from Search for Tomorrow. He then resolves his Prismatic Bridge and hits Rolesk and puts 2 counters on an offenser with his ETB. He casts Kethis, the Hidden Hand. He casts Rishkar and puts a counter on Kethis and Rolesk. He moves to combat and attacks me for 6 with an offenser. He and Nathan draw a card from the curse. He passes the turn. Nathan plays an island. He casts Kenrith's Transformation, targeting Soul Herder. I respond with Eerie Interlude and exile my creatures. With no target, the transformation fizzles. He casts a Knight of Autumn and destroys my Soul Ring. He equips the Knight of Autumn with the boots and moves to combat. He attacks me with Galea and the Knight for 6 and draws a card from the curse. He then passes the turn. At the beginning of his end step, my creatures return. I get a Plains into my hand and draw 2 cards. Yorion then exiles the Farmer, Egg and Fibblethip. Soul Herder should have got 2 counters, but it doesn't matter. I start my turn and move straight to combat. I swing Yorion at Nathan for 4. Dan responds by casting Swords to Plowshares, targeting my Soul Herder. In response, I flicker it with Essence Flux. The swords fizzles, and Nathan takes 4. I cast Forbidding Spirit. I move to my end step. At the beginning of my end step, Soul Herder will go on the stack first again, targeting Yorion. My permanents return, and I get another Plains into my hand and draw 2 cards from their ETBs. The Soul Herder's trigger then resolves and flickers Yorion. When he re-enters, he exiles the Farmer, Egg, Fibblethip and the Guardian Spirit. The Soul Herder gets 3 counters. Joe starts his turn. He draws the Garruk's Horde and reveals Siege Behemoth on top. He casts Nikya and draws a card. He reveals Feral Hydra on top, while I discard to hand size. At the beginning of Joe's end step, the Farmer, Egg, Fibblethip and Spirit re-enter. I get another Plains into my hand and draw 2 cards, and now have 2 of the Guardian Spirit's effects, putting the tax to 4. Dan begins his turn. Prismatic Bridge hits Veyburrow Elder. Search for Tomorrow gets a mountain into play, which should be untapped. He casts Tulane and moves to combat. He pays the 4 mana to attack me with Rolesque. He and Nathan draw a card from the curse. I take 5 and Dan passes. Nathan plays Vitu-Ghazi, the City Tree. He then casts Viridian Longbow from the top of his library and attaches it to Galea. He casts Fey Steed and Ebony Fly. He passes the turn. I play a Plains and move to combat, sending Yorion at Joe. Second main phase, I cast Thran Dynamo. I pass the turn. At the beginning of my end step, Soul Herder blinks Yorion. When Yorion re-enters, he flickers the Farmer, Egg, Fibblethip, Signet and Forbidding Spirit. Soul Herder gets 4 total counters from seeing creatures go to exile. Joe begins his turn, draws the Feral Hydra, then revealing and playing a Spire Garden from the top of his library, then revealing a forest on top. He casts Terastodon and destroys Prismatic Bridge, Swiftfoot Boots and the Thran Dynamo. Joe casts Ravnus the Indomitable and draws a card with Beast Whisperer, revealing a mountain on top, while the rest of us draw our elephant tokens. He moves to his end step, and my Farmer, Egg, Fibblethip, Signet and Forbidding Spirit return, putting another Plains into my hand, drawing 2 cards, and puts the attack tax back on. Dan targets the Egg with Return to Nature. I respond with Ephemerate, targeting Yorion. When he returns, he chooses to exile the Farmer, Egg, Fibblethip and Forbidding Spirit. Nathan responds by pinging Fibblethip with Galea's longbow, whilst Yorion's trigger is on the stack. Soul Herder gets 3 more counters. Dan begins his turn. He casts Archetype of Imagination for 5, mistaking it for a legendary, and draws from True Lane. He moves to combat and pays the taxes to attack me with Erixmithes, True Lane, and an Offenser, putting the counter on Erixmithes, and sends Rolesk and Kethis at Joe. I cast Valorous Stance to destroy Erixmithes. As we can't block, Joe takes 9 damage and I take 6. He and Nathan both draw from the Curse of Verbosity. Dan passes the turn, and my Farmer, Egg, and Forbidding Spirit return, putting a Plains into my hand, drawing a card, and putting the tax up to 4. Nathan begins his turn. He plays a Port Town. He enchants a forest with Utopia Sprawl. He casts Angel of Finality and exiles Dan's graveyard. He then casts Masterwork of Ingenuity, copying the Viridian Longbow. He then equips it to his elephant and passes the turn. In my upkeep, I cast the Rebound of Ephemerate, targeting the Forbidding Spirit, starting the attack tax again. I play Skyshroud Expanse. I cast Ajani, Strength of the Pride. I +1 him and gain 5 life, forgetting to count the elephant. I move to combat and attack Dan with the 12/12 Soul Herder. He chump blocks with the elephant. I pass the turn and flicker the Forbidding Spirit with the Soul Herder, putting the attacks up to 4. Joe draws and reveals Ancient Ziggurat on top. He plays the Ziggurat and reveals Archetype of Endurance. He casts it and reveals Firelit Thicket on top. He casts Flameblast Dragon and draws, revealing Soul Ring on top. Dan is still freaking out about my card draw egg value, and no one bats an eye over Joe playing 3 cards from his library and drawing 2. He moves to combat and attacks Dan with Ronus. Dan blocks with Rishkar. He passes the turn. Dan plays Evolving Wilds. He casts Narset while Nathan and Joe start cracking their best rapid-fire egg jokes. He moves to combat and attacks me with both Rolesk and Anafenza for 12. And he attacks Joe with Tulane for 2. He down-ticks Narset and gets Day of Destiny into his hand.
End step.
Yeah.
Narset takes 2 damage. And
You
then I
son of
attack. I
I'm trying to
want,
stop him.
I want to draw cards then.
Ah,
She's not dead yet.
I hate you.
I'm going to draw for turn.
Keyword yes.
I'm going to tap that. And I'm going to kill Narset.
Of course to draw cards. I didn't even see that coming.
And then I'm going to pay a blue. Oh, actually, before I do this,
He casts Colossus Hammer from the top of his library and equips it to Galea. He then casts Serum Visions, draws and scries 2 to the top. He plays Terramorphic Expanse, which reminds Dan to crack his. Nathan casts Shielding Plaques from the top of his library onto Galea, which has wordy hexproof, but not the hexproof keyword, so it does not lose the effect to Joe's Archetype of Endurance. Neat. He equips Galea with the Behemoth Sledge and moves to combat. He swings the Fey Steed and Galea at Joe. The Fey Steed gives Galea Indestructible. She is also currently a 16/16 with Vigilance, Lifelink, and Trample. Joe blocks Galea with Terastodon and the Fey Steed with Nikya. Joe takes 7 damage. Nathan gains 16. Nathan cracks his Terramorphic Expanse for an island and checks the top card of his library. He plays Sword of Hours from the top and equips it to Galea. He passes the turn. I play Teferi Time Raveler and +1 Ajani to gain 6, ignoring the elephant again. I then use the -3 on Teferi to return my own Forbidding Spirit to my hand and draw a card. I replay the spirit and forget to use the Soul Herder's Blink in my end step. Joe draws and reveals Rurik Thar on top. He plays Firelit Thicket. He casts Xenagos and goes to combat, but forgets the Xenagos trigger, I think. He attacks Nathan with the Flame Blast Dragon and uses its on-attack ability to shoot down Dan's Archetype of Imagination. The dragon regains flying before blocks can be assigned, and does 5 damage to Nathan. He then casts Rurik Thar and draws a card, revealing Pathbreaker Ibex on top. In response, I cast Momentary Blink on Yorion. When he re-enters, I exile Teferi, Ajani, Farmer's Egg, and Forbidding Spirit. My Soul Herder gets 3 more counters. Rurik Thar resolves, and Joe passes the turn. In his end step, my exiled permanents return, and I get planes to my hand, draw a card, and put the tax up to 4. Dan then starts his turn. He casts Sisay, Weatherlight Captain, and activates her to tutor up Kenrith to the battlefield. He moves to combat and pays the tax to attack me with the 6/7 flying Roalesk. I block with Yorion. Dan passes, and Nathan pings Ajani for 1 with Galea in Dan's end step. Nathan plays a forest. The elephant pings Teferi for 1. He activates Ebony Fly and rolls a 5. He moves to combat and swings at me with his commander and pays the tax, while the Ebony Fly attacks Joe and grants his commander flying. I die. Nathan gains 17 life. He passes to Joe. Joe draws and reveals Bramble Sovereign on top. He casts Shaman of the Forgotten Ways and draws a card. He moves to combat and gives the Shaman haste with the Xenagos trigger. He activates the Shaman. It puts Nathan to 4 and Dan to 7. He buffs the Flame Blast Dragon to 7 with Ronus, and swings it and Rurik Thar at Dan, taking him out. He then realizes he's dead on board to Nathan's flyer, and scoops, giving Nathan the win.